In this lesson, I'm going to provide a quick summary of cloud governance. First, we discuss some basic cloud governance concepts and how they apply to the 5 cloud characteristics of on-demand self-service, broad network access, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, and measured services. We also discussed how cloud governance applies to the 3 cloud service models of software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service, and then we looked at how governance applies to the 4 cloud deployment models of public, private, hybrid, and community cloud deployment models. Next, we covered risk assessments, including the 5 steps of the risk assessment process, the method used to classify the risk, how to conduct an asset inventory, and the concepts surrounding data ownership. The 5-step risk assessment process involves first identifying the risk, then analyzing and evaluating the risk, then determining the level of risk, then mitigating the risk, and finally monitoring and reviewing the risks. In order to classify the risks, though, they're typically going to be placed into categories based on the severity and potential impact on your organization. Also, conducting an asset inventory is an essential part of the risk assessment and involves identifying and documenting all of the assets within the organization that could be at risk. And we talked about the concept of data ownership, which is another important factor to consider when conducting risk assessments because it involves identifying who has access to the data and who is responsible for securing it. Next, we discussed the 4 types of risk responses, which are the different ways to manage risks once you've identified them. This includes things like risk mitigation, risk avoidance, risk transfer, and risk acceptance. Risk mitigation involves taking action to reduce the probability or impact of a given risk. Risk avoidance involves eliminating the risk by changing the project plan or business process. Risk transfer involves shifting the risk to another party, and usually this is done through an insurance policy or contract. Risk acceptance involves accepting the risk and creating a contingency plan for when the risk event occurs. By understanding these risk response strategies, an organization can make informed decisions about how to manage the risks that it's going to be facing. Next, we covered risk documentation, including risk registers, vendor lock-in, and data portability. Now, when I talk about a risk register, this is a tool that's used to identify, assess, and track risks in a project or organization. The risk register is essentially a document or a database that lists out all the identified risks, their probability of occurrence, their impact, their priority, and their risk response action plans. We also covered vendor lock-in, and vendor lock-in is a situation where a customer becomes heavily dependent on a particular vendor or service provider, making it difficult or costly to switch to an alternative provider. Data portability refers to the ability to transfer data between different software or cloud services without losing any data or format. All of these are the risks you need to identify and mitigate to effectively use the cloud inside of your organization. Then, we talked about compliance and standards in the cloud, including a discussion on data sovereignty, regulatory concerns, international standards, and certifications. Data sovereignty refers to the laws and regulations that apply to the storage and processing of data inside of a particular country. This is important to understand because where your data is stored and who has access to it can help you to ensure the compliance with local regulations. Regulatory concerns in the cloud also include meeting the requirements of various regulatory bodies that govern specific industries, such as HIPAA for healthcare or PCI DSS for credit card payment information. International standards can also provide a framework for implementing and maintaining an effective information security management system, and there's a lot of standards out there, including the ISO standards, that help you with this. Certifications, such as SOC 2 or FedRAMP, are also used to demonstrate that a cloud service provider has undergone a rigorous audit process to ensure compliance with industry-specific standards and regulations. After that, we discussed standard operating procedures, also known as SOPs. Now, standard operating procedures are specific step-by-step procedural documents for different standard tasks that you perform inside of your organization. The use of these standard operating procedures can help reduce errors, mistakes, and misconfigurations, especially when operating in the cloud. Next, we talked about management policies, such as change management and resource management policies. Change management is a structured approach to ensuring that changes to an organization's IT infrastructure are being made in a controlled and coordinated manner. Resource management policies, on the other hand, define how resources are going to be allocated, monitored, and managed across the organization. By implementing effective management policies, organizations can ensure that their IT infrastructure is secure, efficient, and operating at peak performance. Next, we discussed other important policies, including things like security policies, incident response policies, access control policies, communication policies, and any department-specific policies that may be used inside of your organization. The first policy that we needed to discuss was a security policy, which defines the standards, procedures, and guidelines for safeguarding information assets and IT systems inside of your organization. The second policy we discussed was our incident response policy, which is used to outline the steps to be taken in the event of a security incident or data breach, including how to investigate and respond to that security threat that has now been materialized. The third policy we covered is the access control policy, which is used to ensure that only authorized personnel have access to sensitive data and IT systems. The fourth policy is the communication policy, and this is used to establish guidelines for secure and efficient communication within your organization. The fifth group of policies we talked about was department-specific policies, because these are often used to implement different things within different areas of an organization, depending on the nature of work and the type of data that's being handled. These policies ensure that all the departments are aligned with the overall security objectives of the organization and are compliant with relevant regulations and standards. So, for the exam, it's important to remember the items we just discussed around this topic of cloud governance so you can operate safely, securely, and within the proper regulations anytime you're operating in a cloud-based environment.